Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is time for the making of Truck Puncher. Hilariously late, because I got screwed up in my schedule. Sorry, I'm back. So, this is going to be part one, which is the arrangement of elements, where I just kind of go over what everything is, why and how it was done, and all that sort of explanatory thing. And then part two will be about sound design. Part three will be about mixing and mastering. So, to begin with this, let's actually explain why I called this track Truck Puncher, because it's kind of weird. A lot of people have been asking it. Some people know because I did actually explain this one time on a stream, but the larger sort of audience has no idea what I'm talking about when something is called Truck Puncher. It's actually an in-joke with some friends of mine. Okay, so there is a tabletop role-playing game called All Flesh Must Be Eaten. You can Google it, it's around, it's whatever. But it's about zombies. And it's essentially, people who have no idea what any of that all is about, it's essentially D&D, but for zombies in modern times. It's a gross oversimplification of how that works out, but that's enough to get you going if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, so a friend, we were just, this was the first campaign that my friend had ever DM'd, or ZM'd, there was a term for that. And I was playing, and we were testing out the systems. There were some funny stories about how we really sucked at understanding how the systems worked. But one of the things you can do is that there's various archetypes for players and monsters and all that kind of thing. But you can design your own zombie type, and there are ways to calculate all the kind of stuff that matters in that sort of idea. And my friend had essentially created a version of the tank from Left 4 Dead. It wasn't exactly the same. There were some differences, but again, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's enough to get you going. And its introduction to my character, was that as I was going about and being in the world that we were in, that we created, the telltale sign that this thing had been somewhere was that there was a truck with a gigantic fist imprint in it somewhere. And that just seemed to be what happened, where there's mayhem and destruction, and then a truck with a fist hole in it, like a fist imprint, like it were made out of Play-Doh, and someone just kind of yeah, because this thing was ludicrously strong. That was the whole idea. So my character had no idea about anything that was happening. So whenever I were to refer to this thing's existence, the only thing I could draw from was the fact that it seems to like punching trucks. So it was the Truck Puncher. And that's just what we called it from then on. It wasn't the tank, it wasn't the heavy, it wasn't any kind of Goliath or anything that video games tend to call the meaty, large, thuggish zombies. It was the Truck Puncher. That's what we refer to it as. And I decided to name this track that because it really it pumped me up. This track is really, it really gets your energy going. It really gets you pumped up, and it makes you want to punch things. And I decided that I was going to channel that concept and name it Truck Puncher. Now, let's get on to that. Let's get on to some more about what the track is about. So, writing this track was my attempt at creating a sort of more mainstream version of my sort of process. This track I actually made almost a year ago, actually, because the project name is 12841, which is the tempo and the date. So that's March 1st that I wrote this track, which is coming up on exactly a year ago. So that's kind of a long time ago. And this is generally how this works for people who are in the professional game of releasing music, is that when they ever come out with an album or an EP or something, more often than not, the tracks had been done for a very long time. And I wasn't aware this is how it's going to be. And actually, I've had this explained to me. The first time that I met AU5 and Fractal, actually, they had talked about a track that they had showed me finished tracks when I was at BT's house that I didn't see released for another year. They didn't get up, and there'd be Monster Care released. This is a brand new track. I was like, wait, I heard that a year ago. That was so long ago. What the hell? And the track had, at that time, that track had already been done for a very long time, and I didn't understand how that world worked like that, because at the time I was just, whenever I finished a track, it would go up on SoundCloud and there'd be a video and there'd be a making of like this, and so it was just weird. Anyway, so this track is pretty ridiculously old, but for that you have to kind of understand what I was doing a year ago. A year ago, this is before a lot of my my current sort of sound design advancements, my current understanding of mixing and mastering, and a lot of stuff that I learned. Obviously, I wasn't applying in this track. In fact, this is the first track where I used a separate sub on purpose. There it is, right there. It's the sub. I had not done that in previous tracks. I had actually I just didn't do that. And the whole reason why I did it because this track was my like I said, it was an experiment in trying to be more mainstream, a mainstream version of what I do. What I did at the time was largely, Madian-esque kind of more Mustangy, M4 Sonic almost sort of just poppy sort of electro, but with way more bass in it, like just a lot of like big bass antics. Bass antics was older even then. It was pretty old, but like I was still on that. That was still my style. I was still very into that. And like I learned a lot of stuff about sort of catchiness in songs, making a song catchy, and I learned this by studying a whole lot of Monster Cat tracks, because while they're not like the end all in catchy music and electro even at all, it's still a pretty reasonable place to start if I wanted to see like, okay, what do people like, why do they like it, why is it good, that kind of thing. And two artists stuck out to me, Nitro Fun and Let's Be Friends. Yes, and Nitro Fun because at the time the track that I was referencing was New Game, and he didn't seem to care at all about like his bass arrangement. There was just sounds everywhere, and it worked. I was like, okay. And then Let's Be Friends, specifically for mixing related things. And so those two ideas came together for me to kind of do two primary things with this track that were new for me. One was to like have an actual lead line, an actual theme that people can get into, that kind of idea. And also the idea that it doesn't have to be that complex. It doesn't need to be a billion basses per second. It could be repetitive and it can still work, because it can have a groove. It can stick with it. It doesn't have to be more than that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's less than that. And it allows you to get into it. You can headbang. You don't have to worry about it. And there's a value in that. And like I like incredibly complicated music as much as the next guy, but this was my sort of attempt to seeing if I could make something that wasn't complicated, that was still good and catchy. And hence I had this track, which is, in comparison to like even other tracks on the same album that this thing came out on, it was super bland. But that was its point. It wasn't trying to be super intelligent. It wasn't trying to have ultra sound design. It was trying to have fun. And it worked pretty well, I think, anyway. So now that was all that direction was new for me. Another new thing was that I actually started with the intro when I made this track, and I just mentioned, the New Fun Nitro Fun's New Game track. This intro timing is pretty much directly ripped from that track. The idea of the 4-bar, the 16-bar kind of build, and then the 4-bar break, and then the 8-bar rise, which kind of looks like a 12-bar rise, but really it's an 8-bar rise with a 4-bar break, which is still symmetrical. That's why it still works. And I got that from Nitro Fun's track. And I also kind of got the energy and the feeling from Nitro Fun's track with this sort of high-passed kind of deal. Although I did also take that from my own previous work, my track Remember, from the Momentum EP, which is the EP that I released before this EP came out. That kind of deal. So I made all of this as it is before I made the drop, which is a little funny because nowadays when I do lessons, I actually use this track as being like a super generic example of songwriting, like mixing, and also like arrangement. I say songwriting and arrangement for two different things because when I set out to write a song, I almost always start with a drop. And until this track, I had always started with a drop. But I actually started with the intro in this track, and that was weird. And a lot of problems people have, which I did have when I made this track, a lot of problems people have usually come down to the idea that, like, oh, I made this really badass intro, and now I have no idea where to go with the drop. I had no idea, like, what, I can't make something that lives up to the hype my intro created. Because it's really easy to make awesome hype intro, but really hard to make something that, like, now lives up to what you have in your head about about the hype for this intro that you created. Big deal. It is a big deal. So then, my preferable method to approach song writing is to begin with the drop, And then now you don't have to worry about the hype problem because now you know. And then you can make an appropriate intro. Usually with whatever elements you create in the drop. So that's all synergistic and shit. It's pretty good. So I had that problem. I had the problem of I made this intro and now I don't know how, I don't even know what to do with the drop. So I started off as I usually do, which is just to put a bunch of basses down. I'm trying to go with the new game, Nitro Fun, new game style of just putting bass sounds down. Another thing I tried to do to try and like just be mainstreamy was the main bass in this track. This guy here is actually a massive patch. Whoa. That's so loud. Why is that so loud? Something hilariously wrong with my computer. Whatever. Anyway, this track, this patch is a massive patch. Because my whole thing was like, well, they're all using massive, so why don't I try to use massive? Because maybe it has something to do with massive. Turns out, not really. It's not really about massive. It's just about how you use whatever it is you're using, as I kind of knew that already. But I just kind of had this sort of, like, maybe really, like, no. Or maybe I just don't get massive, which is totally possible, but I made a thing of massive. But so I did that, and, like, it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work is because I did not have this. I didn't have this melodic lead line that I had going on in the drop, and it's because pretty much all of my songs up until this point, I had never had an actual lead line in it. I have had chords, I've had progressions, and every once in a while I had a melody. But for the most part, it was just progressions and chords. And like I've never, especially in the drop. Like normally the way I do drops is I have bassy crazy drop, and then I have like melodic present sort of accumulated drop where like all the stuff goes into the drop, and all the melody comes together, and that's what just all there for the B part of the drop. A part of the drop could be like whatever basses I want to have in there, and then the B part is like, oh, by the way, here's the song that we've been listening to. A wonderful example of that would be my track Codename Hurricane. It pretty much is exactly that, to a T. But this track was different. This track is different because I had already made the intro. Because normally what I'll do is I'll make the A part with all the basses, and I'll make the B part with like a progression and melody usually, and then I'll make the intro out of the B part. I'll take the intros and melodies and whatever and put them over here, chords, arps, and filters and sweeps and shit, and that will be my intro. But I have my whole process was screwed up by this track, so I said, well, if I normally make the B part, if I normally make the intro out of the B part, because the B part has all the elements all together. And then I had this intro, and this is the intro because like I had done this. This is fully finished right here, right? Like good. I had not changed it ever since. And if that's the case, then what do I have in the intro, and what can I make out of that? And that was this line. I made that line. I said, okay, that's the song. That has to be the song now. And it doesn't really progress. It's pretty much, the one the whole time, but that was enough for the A drop. So I basically layered this over there and made another version of it that has that kind of sound going on with it. And then I just kind of chopped up. I put basses in between and on top of and layered and that kind of thing. And that was the first time I had ever done that. And that flowed really well because the thing here, this is less to do with drop writing and more to do with writing a song that belongs to itself, because a big problem I guess it's not really a problem if you don't really care, but a big thing that annoys me in EDM in general is this writing tendency where we write intros, we write progressions, and we write melodies, and then we write drops that have nothing to do with that. They have no relation whatsoever. In fact, it's almost as if people took the DJ mentality of mixing songs together where they would have intros from one song and just cut to the drops of the other songs. And they just didn't understand that that's what was happening. That was a cut. That was two different songs. They just said, okay, that's how a song goes. And then they write music where it's like that kind of contrast is just how they understand music to be, which is fine. We get a lot of writing tendencies in hip-hop and electronic music and any kind of really in radio-based music. We get a whole lot of stuff that is just from how DJs play stuff when we grow up listening to DJs. When we go to actually make the stuff ourselves, our understanding of what is good is based on how we've had DJs play stuff. This is where we get the kind of pumpy sidechaining thing that we like a lot. That's from 90s house DJs pushing the limiters too hard. Like that, and people like the sound. Like that's that kind of stuff. So we get a lot of that going on when we actually end up writing tracks. And so one of the things that I mean, that's fine, that's totally cool. But what ends up happening is that it's almost as if the drops are basically like remixes of the tracks that they're in, and it's just so weird to me. I do that a lot. I've done that myself. I'm not saying that like I'm blameless or that it's bad, but there is something to be said for having a track where everything is kind of related to itself, where there's a progression in this melody, and then there's lots of bass or whatever, but the bass all follows all of that, and it's actually in the same song. So, and this idea is very present in the intro. It's like, if you have your intros, you have the big, a melodic build up and sweeps and all these things, and you have a drop that has none of the elements in it. It's jarring, and sometimes that jarring can be good, but most of the time that kind of jarring is bad. So having a drop that actually has all the melodic content that you've been listening to for the last however many bars, is like, it's 29 bars? 28 bars. Like 28 bars of... That's in your head now. That's like your life now after having listened to that. And then when something plays that isn't that, you're just like... But if something plays that is that, you can get into it more. You can be like, yes, this is what I wanted in my life. And that's what I believe to be good songwriting. I don't always do it, which is funny. I just said that, but that's because my priorities are not always the same when I'm writing songs. And that's probably true for you as well. And it's also true for when I made the B part of this drop, which is not anything I just described. So two things entered my mind when I got to the B part. The first part was that I'd essentially already accomplished what I normally do with B parts of drops, which is to say this whole melodic, fully realized concept of the song. That's pretty much this. That already happened, because I have the fully realized melodic progression of the song is this. There's nothing else happening. There's no chord progression. There's no movement or whatever. So what else is there to do? So I basically just do what I just described, which is to say that the B part is the same but different, and I more or less remixed it in its own track. And I also did still apply some of the ideas that I was trying to approach with this track, which is mostly that things can be simple and that groove is good. So I stuck with the every 4 bars. Now there's that thing going on, which is a lot of fun. And I still have the chords hitting every bar. I have all the basses. I have all the materials in there. They're just kind of arranged differently, but they're still related to what the original concept was. This is essentially, I guess I had a remix of the first drop. And it was simple. There's not crazy stuff happens. This is still just a groove that you can get into. And the main melodies, it's not really that complicated. And I took that cue, again, from sort of listening to the Let's Be Friends stuff. The Nitro Fun track was the only track I had at the time. And, man, he really went weird, didn't he? But, Other Monster Cat just kind of like what groove was, what people liked out of it. And I realized that a lot of that was just not complicating things, not trying super hard to make stuff complicated. And so I didn't do that, which was hard for me. So it's almost I tried super hard and not try super hard. Yeah. So that was this drop. And then came the break. This was now the breakdowns. Breakdowns are all about, we just have been high energy for the last 4 minutes. And we want to have a middle of the track before we go to doing that again, right? That's pretty much the functional aspect of what a break is supposed to be. In regular music terms, this is called a bridge. And it's the same idea. It's not so much the idea that we're giving a break from high energy, it's the idea that we're giving us a break from whatever the hell content we have beforehand, usually verses and chorus, and so we have progressions and melodies that are pretty much present that we are used to in our heads. And we want to have something different now, so that when we go back to it, it's still fresh, because now we have this other thing in our brains too. I didn't really know where to go with that, but I noted still that I had gotten up to this point, and there still has not been a progression. There was no progression. There was just a melody, a lead line that stuck at the tonic, the root note, the 1. I didn't go anywhere. And so I wrote a bridge that was still that, but moved around and had other aspects to it. One thing that's very clear about a lot of Monster Cat tunes is that there's this focus on kind of pretty, on very pretty. Not something to judge as Monster Cat, but like Monster Cat like related promotional channels on YouTube. Lots of pretty stuff. And so I decided to go try and make something pretty. And that was mostly this. On top of ARPs and stuff. There's like automation clips and whatever, sweeping and changing things, which is why when I stole that, it didn't work. Anyway, so that was the bridge in doing that. Now this was actually kind of an accident. I did not plan to do this at all, but the cool like part that came out of this is that now that we've created this new idea, this idea of progression, this idea of movement, when I go to do the second drop, the second drop is almost identically the same as the first. Like I didn't change it that much, but I did make one very important change, which is that I integrated that movement into it, mostly in the second half of the A part. So I was able to keep it fresh while really not changing much. So we have still the groove that we're expecting, but it moves. And so we have the groove, but it's just new and cool and neat and nice and neat and pretty. So we're integrating all these nice concepts that I was trying to achieve based on what I was attempting to rip off. So that's nice. And then there's a second drop, and then there's an outro. And like almost nothing else matters in this track. So one other cool thing about sort of what's happening here is that there's this main bass. And the neat thing is that like this bass and this bass kind of sound like they're the same bass a lot of the times. Like that, or like it sounds like it's the same sound, but it's not. They're two different sounds. And like this sound is also this percussive bit that comes in during the melody doing the same thing. Which, like this combo, this layering idea was very new to me. I normally don't like layering. I normally like to have one thing do one thing. That's just sort of my own neurosis, I guess. It has nothing to do with any kind of like engineering principle or whatever, other than just I like doing that, and that's what's up with that. So when we get the sound design, we'll talk about what the individual elements are that are creating all these things in here. But for the most part, I just wanted to point out that was two different things because it's sort of a neat idea that they blend together so well. And that's something that comes up a lot with, again, things that students ask me and people ask me on streams or whatever, is that how, when we are making this complicated multi-bass music, how do we make the basses sound like they belong to each other? Because they're usually different sounds, different things. And they sound like they're too different. They're not in the song. They're not, like, they're on top of each other in weird ways, and how do we make them not do that? And I managed to accomplish this there, so we'll talk about that when we get the sound design and mixing. This is a riser from Leviathan because I like Leviathan risers. Like, one of the big parts about making this track was that I was trying not to work so hard, which seems like a weird thing to say. Like, what I was trying to do, because a thing that I do that is a super duper rare thing that I've noticed in other producers is that I have this incredible, like, desire to make everything about these tracks from scratch. I never use presets. I don't use things like Nexus. I rarely ever use samples, except for like, just drum samples, stuff like that. And even then, I don't use like the mainstream packs. And it has nothing to do with just sort of like this hipstery idea of being like, hey, I didn't use whatever you use. That's just how I want to do things. And as a result of that, I make music that doesn't really sound like anything else, which is good, but insofar as me attempting to teach people how to do this, they usually want to know how to make stuff that sounds like everything else. That's usually what people are after. So I wanted to see if I could do that, if I actually tried. And a big part of that is this idea that, especially larger producers who do this kind of stuff that is more popular, that is more mainstream, is that they are much more efficient about it. They are very efficient producers. They don't spend a lot of time making unnecessary things by like themselves if it already exists. And I don't mean necessarily like, well, when I say unnecessary things, I mean things that are not necessarily integral to like the sound that they have. They make the important stuff. They have, their own sort of style and whatever, but they usually like, I brought up Nexus. There's a lot of very popular sounds in Nexus that are just in everything. Because if they want a piano, there's some really good Nexus pianos. If they want a super saw, there's just so many good super saws in Nexus, and you just have them. They're good. And why bother making that yourself if you already have a good one? And for the most part, for me, it's because I like doing things the hard way. But not doing things the hard way creates a certain homogenous sort of genre style that people, are very after. When they say like, I want my thing to sound more professional, they're really saying that they want their thing to sound like everything else. Which the merit of that is debatable. But again, if I'm attempting to do that, if that's what I want to do, then I have to be in that mindset, the mindset of not trying to work too hard, not trying to do unnecessary things, do unnecessarily complicated sound design, just to do things that sound like other stuff. And I don't really have that. I still don't have Nexus, so that means, and I don't use Silence. I don't use the generally used things, so this still means that I have to do my own sound design just to make stuff sound like that. But this idea of it being like, I didn't make the riser, I just used the riser found in the pack, like that sort of idea, translates to the production style of professionals, and that's why I did that. And that was a whole philosophical thing. I pretty much didn't use that approach ever again, but that's what this talk was about. And we'll cover more of that when we get to the sound design part, which is in part 2, coming out tomorrow, if I'm not dumb. And part 3 is mixing and mastering, which will come out the day after, if I, again, not dumb. I'm pretty sure I'm on point. I'm pretty sure this will work. If you guys have any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.